This is Mike Brooks, Mr. Inside Sales himself, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, 3 Things You Must Ask Every Prospect. It is really great to have you here today, and if you are watching this review somewhere, I'm happy that you've shown up. You're going to be happy that you've spent a little bit of time with us today. By the way, all of you who are listening live, please make sure that your speakers are turned up, and in the question and answer box there, please let me know that you can see the screen okay and that you can hear me okay, please. Just write in there that everything is good to go. Oh, thanks, everyone. That's terrific. By the way, make sure you have something to write with. Make sure you've got something to take some notes with. In fact, I think there may be a little camera icon at the top right of your screen. I believe GoToWebinar's incorporated that into their system, and you can click on that during any slide, and it should automatically save a copy of that slide to your desktop so you can write down the very, very important exact words and phrases and scripts we're going to give you today. So now that that is out of the way, once again, I want to welcome everyone to this webinar, and I want to thank you for taking some time out of your busy day. And I know we have sales teams. I know that there are sales teams in conference rooms right now that are watching this. I'd like to thank you as well and congratulate you, because you are doing something that 90% of your competition won't do, and that is to take some time to invest in yourself, your career, and to learn more about your profession called sales. And I'll tell you now, the more time and money and energy you devote and invest in yourself, the more money you will make, the more time you will have, and the more you'll be able to enjoy the energy you'll save. So congratulations. All right, let's go ahead and dive in today. We've got a value-packed webinar. We've got some wonderful things to talk to you about. This is one of my favorite subjects of all, and you're going to see why in just a moment. 3 things you must ask every prospect. Let's talk a little bit about what you're going to learn today. Number 1, you're going to learn why most prospects don't close and what to do about it. We're going to dive into that a little deeper today because it is really appalling from my standpoint. And I know you've had this experience as well. Hey, most of the people that you speak with, and I'm not talking about the people you initially contact, I'm talking about your actual leads, the people you thought were qualified prospects. Most of them don't close. What should you do about that? I'm going to tell you today. Number 2, you're going to learn how to avoid some of the biggest objections by prospecting properly. I get asked so many times, how do I overcome this objection? How do I overcome it when they say this? How do I deal with this objection during the close? And I'm going to tell you a secret to closing right now. Most of the objections that you face at the end of your demo or during your presentation or during your follow-up calls, many of those objections should have been qualified for on your first phone call. And if you learn to qualify properly, and I'm going to teach you 3 things today that are going to enable you to avoid these objections during the close. And this is going to make you so much more money and make you so much more confident. That's number 2. Number 3, again, I'm going to teach you the 3 things that you must ask every prospect. And I'm going to give you word-for-word scripted ways of asking these 3 things. So you're going to learn a lot, and I guarantee that if you apply this to your selling situations, you will soon be one of the top producers in your company and or industry. Okay, let's dive deeper here. Let's talk about why most prospects don't close. The first thing I want to ask you is, what is your closing percentage? Now, once again, I don't mean about how many people you speak to, all right? During your day of prospecting or calling or taking inbound leads or going on appointments, you probably speak to a lot of people. What I'm talking about is how many prospects that you qualify and put into your pipeline. How many of those people close? In other words, out of 10 leads or 10 demos or 10 presentations or 10 follow-up closing calls, out of those 10 prospects, how many do you close? And by the way, I love this graphic here on the right side because I've got news for you. The national average close rate, and again, I work across industries all over the world, and I ask the companies, the sales managers, the reps, I say, hey, out of 10 prospects that you put into your pipeline, how many come out the end and close? And the national average is 2 out of 10. Just compare that with your own closing percentage. I'll bet it's very accurate. And if you think about that, and you think about this picture on the right-hand side, what this means, and this is really the scary part of sales, this used to frustrate the heck out of me, what this means is that you spend 80% of your day, just think about this, you spend 80% of your day pitching, chasing, and losing 8 out of 10 prospects. And again, I love this graph here. Look at all those people standing on the top of this pipeline. You see all those people there? Again, the national average is that salespeople, sales teams, entire companies across multiple locations are spending 80% of their time with all of those people on the top of their pipeline that never result in a deal. They never make you any money. In fact, for the most part, they encourage you to use poor selling skills that make you weaker, that lose you money, and more importantly, lose you the valuable time that you could have spent looking for these 2 people who are going to close. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Why is this happening? And here's a great picture of a pipeline. Again, out of 1,000 leads, you generate 100 prospects, you close 10 deals. There's 1 out of 10 right there. Now, here's why this happens. Most companies teach you to fill your pipeline. In fact, you know this is true with your own company. If you're a manager or a business owner, I'll bet you even have sales dashboards. I'll bet you have metrics. I'll bet you measure down to the one person. You measure how many leads are going into your pipeline, at what stage of the pipeline they're falling out, and I'm sure you even have statistics on if a person makes it to a 3rd presentation, they're probably 60 or 70% more likely to be a deal, and if they make it to that 3rd or 4th call, I'll bet you measure everything. But the number one thing companies are measuring are how many leads are going into the pipeline, and that is your or their answer to increasing sales. Hey, I know that 1 out of 1,000 are closing, so or 10 out of 1,000, so we better put another 5,000 leads into that pipeline. And you've heard it said, it's a numbers game. Hey, it's a numbers game. And I'd like to say, or is it? Or is it? And I'm going to answer that question this way. Yes, it's a numbers game. But you're, for the most part, if you're following this model, and again, there are entire CRM systems that measure this, these are the wrong numbers to be measuring. These are not the numbers that are going to make you money. And now let me tell you a little story. When I was selling and I was closing investment sales over the phone, we used to have a manager that used to go up and down our aisles and in the sales meetings, and he used to pitch 8 and 5 to stay alive. And what that meant was he told us, and again preached this every single day, you need to get out 8 leads, every single day. You need to put 8 leads into your pipeline. And during that same day, you need to go on 5 closes. In other words, you had to have a minimum of 5 pitches that day if you want to make your numbers. Well, I started thinking about that. Gee, 8, yeah, and I would get out there and I'd put 8 leads into my pipeline. And most of them weren't fully qualified. I never asked the questions I'm going to teach you to ask today. And I'll tell you, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, I had so many prospects that I was getting back to. Most of them I was chasing. Most of them wouldn't do it, were never going to do it, It was exhausting. It made me feel weak as a sales closer. It made me feel less than, and I didn't make any money. Well, when I did learn the things I'm going to teach you today, I dramatically changed the numbers. And again, it is a numbers game, but here were my new numbers. Now what I committed to doing was to fully qualify my prospects on the front end because, and here's the key, and listen carefully, I didn't want to keep putting 8 people who were never going to buy in my pipeline. I would rather disqualify them out in the beginning and uncover who was really going to buy and who wasn't. So after a while, guess where my numbers were? I didn't get out 8 and 5 to stay alive every day. I got out 8 leads in a week. And in the beginning, my manager was appalled and scared for me and thought I wasn't working hard enough and said, Mike, you need more leads. I said, no, I don't need more leads. I need more buyers. And what happened is by asking the questions I'm going to teach you today, I identified who the buyers were. And my numbers were suddenly, I would send out 8 leads in a week, and I would close 5 of them. That dramatically increased the amount of time that I had to properly prospect and find real buyers. That dramatically increased my confidence level. That dramatically increased my closing percentage. It cut down on all the non-buyers I was having to wade through. And ultimately, it made me a top 1% closer. And I'm going to share with you today what questions I asked specifically to identify who they were. And again, this led me to believe, and it's been a lifelong philosophy and a training philosophy as a consultant for me, most leads don't close because they aren't qualified. In other words, those 8 people never should get into your pipeline ever again. And I'm going to teach you how to do that today. Okay, here are some other things I learned very quickly. Unqualified leads, those 8 out of 10, they equal objections that you can't overcome. And that's fresh. I love this image of this guy with his hand on his head. I used to feel like that all the time. I look at all the people I had to call back and think, oh, my golly, these people aren't going to buy. Now what am I going to do? And you know those 8 out of 10 leads that don't buy? Well, guess what? You can't close them. All right? In other words, you're going to have the majority of leads in your pipeline you are not going to be able to close. That's a very defeating feeling. I remember coming in the morning having all these leads to call back, and I knew that most of them weren't going to close. It was frustrating. Well, here's the thing. Out of those 8 out of 10 leads, you can't close them. Guess what? Your manager can't close them. You know, I can come into your office, and I can't close them. Nobody can close an unqualified lead. And all you business owners and VPs and sales reps, you listen very carefully again. This is what the majority of sales teams are trying to do right now. Right now, we could go into any company, look at their entire sales team's leads in the pipeline, and we can say, hey, 8 out of 10 of these are never going to close. You can just throw all of those away, all of the time, resources, energy, money, all of the energy spent. They're not closing. I can't close them. The owner can't close them. No one can close them because they are unqualified. And what this means is we better start doing things differently. And here's the solution. You need to qualify for what turn out to be the 3 most important deal killers of all. And as I go through these, I just want you to think about your own presentation and what comes up at the end when you ask for the order. Think about the objections that come up at the end when you ask for the order. Here's what they are. Number 1, you don't know who the real decision maker is. For example, have you ever gotten to the end of your close and said, hey, let's get you started, or how does this sound, or does this look like it'd be a fit for you? And how many times do you hear every single day, often out of the 8 out of the 10 who don't buy, they say, well, you know, I'm going to need to check with someone. I'm going to need to run this by my regional manager. I'm going to need to talk to the boss. I'm going to have to get my partner online. I'm going to have to escalate this over to corporate and see what they think. Interesting story, I was doing a sales training just yesterday for a team, we were going over their recordings. We were talking about this very concept, and one of the guys said, yeah, you know, he said, I have a dramatically different experience in closing ratios when I'm speaking to the direct decision maker. I said, yeah, that's a good answer. You're right. And the problem is most people are not speaking to the decision makers, which is why the sales stall, and which is why many times they don't close. So that's number one. Number two, you don't understand the sales process that the decision goes through. In other words, you haven't actually identified what the next steps are. And again, this is a crucial problem because many times you'll get back to that prospect, and not only will they say, well, you know, I'm going to need to show this to someone. If you even ask how long that takes, they'll tell you, well, you know, the board isn't meeting until the end of this month. We're not making decisions until the third quarter. Again, many times you have no idea what the real sales process is. Even if it's a family you're dealing with selling insurance, you don't have an idea of what that sales process is because nobody is asking the right questions. Good news for you, it's going to change in just a moment here. Number three, you don't fully understand the time frame for making that decision. And that's crucially important too. I've had prospects say to me all the time, yeah, this looks great. Okay, well, this is going to go into our second quarter, end of second quarter. That's when we're thinking of doing this. Wow, it's a good thing I knew that up front. Now I know how to appropriately follow up and keep them in the sales pipeline. Okay, so that's the solution now. Everybody get your pens ready. Put your cursor over that little camera icon. Get ready to start taking some notes, because here's how we're going to handle this. Now, once again, I'm going to give you right now the three things that you need to ask every single prospect in order to identify those three areas that we just went through. And again, I guarantee you, if you do ask these questions and if you do learn this information about your prospects, it will dramatically change your closing percentage, which is going to impact your wallet, your lifestyle, your family, and your future. So here's what they are. Here's how you identify the decision maker. First of all, let's talk about what doesn't work. Do you make the decisions on this? I'll tell you now, at least 65% of the sales teams I work with, the recordings I listen to, if they even qualify for the decision maker at all, and again, I'll tell you now, about half of the people don't. They just assume that the GM makes the decision, or the office manager, or the doctor, or the business owner. They don't even know who the other decision makers are. And if they do, they ask it this way: do you make the decisions on this? Hey, I got news for you now. Most prospects will say yes. This is a closed-ended question. Most prospects would rather just say yes and then reveal the truth later on. You're creating a smokescreen with this. Here's the better way to ask this. Besides yourself, John, who else is involved in making a decision on this? Done. Hit your mute button. That's a great, great question to ask to identify who the other decision makers are, because let's face it, there are always other decision makers. You don't make a decision by yourself. You ask your workmates, you ask your spouse, you ask your boyfriend, girlfriend, you talk to your boss, you read reviews online. Who else besides yourself makes this decision? And then if they say, well, you know what, I'm going to have to run this by corporate, I'm going to have to take this to my regional manager, I'm going to have to show this to my spouse, or whomever else, you then say, well, just out of curiosity, how much influence do you have? This is a question people are not asking. It's crucial information. If you're talking to somebody who only has a 10% influence and they need to then hand it off to their management team, guess who you need to speak to? The management team, not the person you're speaking with. How much influence do you have? Important question. Here's another one. What has happened when you've taken these kinds of things to them before? That's a great insight getter for you to determine who actually has the power to make this decision. Hey, if they've been looking at adding an advertiser for the last 3 or 4 or 5 months, and your influencer has taken 4 or 5 things to them, they haven't moved on any of them, wouldn't you like to know why not? You bet you would. What has happened when you've taken things like these to them in the past? What happens when you hand things off to your management team? What does your regional manager normally do with suggestions or from you? You need insight into that process. And these are the simple questions that 90% of sales reps fail to ask. That will change with you today. That's number one. Now let's talk about the sales process. Let me tell you what doesn't work. When should I get back with you? And by the way, I generally ask as many of these questions as I can during the prospecting phase. Again, remember, it all happens during that prospecting call, but you can ask these questions throughout your sales cycle. You can ask these during the close, and we're going to talk about the next questions on the next slide that you can ask at the beginning of your demo, at the beginning of your presentation, or during the prospecting call. But you must learn about the sales process. When should I get back with you doesn't cut it. Here's what you do want to say. All right, great, John, what happens next? Simple as that. What happens next? Hit mute. Listen. Take notes. And you can ask this during the prospecting call. I'll be more than happy to get a quote off to you. I'll be more than happy to get this information off to you. I'll go ahead and set up a demo with you. John, if you happen to like what you see, what would happen next? Hit your mute button. What would happen next? How about this one? Tell me about that process. So if they say, hey, you know, I'd have to shoot this off to corporate. Oh, terrific. Tell me about that process. How does that work? I'm telling you, you're going to get information that's going to determine if this is a viable prospect who belongs in your pipeline or if they don't. And then again, if you're dealing with an influencer, as many times you are, you had better ask this question. And just out of curiosity, how are you involved in that process? Think about the time you could save as a closer if you just asked these questions up front. Think about the headaches, the frustration you could avoid if you just had this information up front. Think about how much better, more confident, and more prepared you would be as a closer if you just had this information up front. These are the kinds of questions that I ask every single prospect. These are the kinds of questions the top 20% ask every single prospect. And they're the questions you can ask as well. You need to understand the sales process. Now let's talk about time frame. And let's talk about what not to do. When are you looking to make a decision on this? Hey, you know what? Years ago, that might be a good question to ask. Now it's too vague. It allows too much wiggle room for your non-buyers to hide behind. You need to know what happens next. Again, you can ask this question on the prospecting call or at the very beginning of your demo. Here's number one. After you get sign-off from your corporate or your boss, how long before you move forward on something like this? And again, you can change that language. How long before you folks are looking to make a move on something? How long before you folks are looking to make a decision on something? How long before you folks are looking to put this kind of solution to work for you? Again, at the end of your demo, at the end of your presentation, when your prospect says, well, I'm going to need to show this to the corporate office, you're already going to know what kind of influence your main person has. You're already going to know what happens generally when they take something like this to them in the past because you're going to have asked that question. So rather than saying, well, when should I get back to you, which is how 80% of your competition answer this question when they say, well, I need to show it to someone, you're going to assume the deal. Well, after you get sign-off from your whomever they say, how long before you move on forward on something like this? And then I've saved my favorite, best question. Best of all, this question, wow, this rocks. How about this? If you like what you see in the demo, is there anything that would prevent you from moving forward on this in the next 2 weeks? How's that for a trial close? Now, let me back up. I know some of you say, well, I could never ask that. Well, that's too forward to ask that. Well, my sales cycle is 2 months rather than 2. No problem. No problem. We're going to adjust it to fit your selling situation, but we're going to keep the spirit. We're going to keep the intent. We're going to keep the power of this statement. At the beginning of any demo or presentation, this is going to be one of the most important questions that you can ask. John, you know what? I'm happy you joined me today. I can't wait to show you the slides on how this is going to work for your business. Wow, it's just so exciting. And I know from our last conversation, you're the property manager, or you're the executive director, and I know you influenced the decision about 50%. My goal is to certainly make you a fan of this. But let me ask you this. Let's say we go through the entire demo, and you like what you see. You see how this can fit into your business. You see how it can help generate more leads, exposure, whatever. Is there anything that you can think of if, again, after you like what you see, is there anything that would prevent you from moving forward on this over the next 2 weeks? And again, if your sales process is longer, anything that would prevent you from moving forward in the next 2 months or this quarter. Again, use the time frame that's appropriate for your sale, but I got news for you. This one sentence will flush out so many unheard, unspoken, unknowable objections from you. You will immediately get a sense of if this prospect is a real, live buyer and what the sales process is going to be for closing them. And I'll tell you now, 99% of the recordings that I listen to, I don't hear sales reps asking this. And after I work with a sales team and they start asking this question, you'll be amazed at the kind of information, at the kind of power, confidence, direction for the close you're going to get by asking this question. This is so powerful. If you like what we're going to go over here, is there anything that would prevent you from moving forward on this in the next 2 weeks? And I'll tell you, well, here, I used this line just the other day with a sales prospect. They were calling in to get information on a training program. I say, hey, I've been more than happy to supply that to you. If you like what you see, is there anything that would prevent us from doing business or from me working with you in the next 2 weeks? And they said, yeah. 2 weeks is too short of a time frame. I still have to run this by my general manager. We're reviewing other proposals, and our sales meeting isn't really until April of this year. I say, terrific. That gives me a lot more information, a lot better way to follow up with you. And now I know how to keep myself in the running for this sale. I know when to check back with that prospect. These are all things that I got because I asked this question. Crucially important. Summary, you can't close an unqualified lead. There is nothing more true in sales than that. You can't close an unqualified lead. And yet, as we found, 80% of the leads in most companies and sales reps' pipelines are unqualified. And leads always get worse. This is a sad truth that I've had too much experience with. You may have had experience with it as well. Hey, if you get out a lead on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning they're a deal, 1 meaning the phone's disconnected, if you get out a lead and they're a 6, have you ever found when you call back they're at about a 4? You see, leads never get better. Unqualified leads get even worse. You have to qualify your lead. And I guarantee you, by qualifying on the 3 must-ask questions up front, you will begin getting out more qualified leads. You'll know what it's going to take to close those leads, and you're going to close more sales as a result. That's the bottom line. And by the way, when you close more sales, it's a positive loop that reinforces itself. You begin getting more confident. You begin being you begin being stronger with the prospects that you're trying to close. You identify more buyers. You spend less time with non-buyers that take your energy. It's a win-win for you. And I'm going to give you a way here to close even more leads. Some of you may already know about the most valuable resource, and I'm sending you the link on the right side now, my 5 CD series, How to Double Your Income Selling Over the Phone. I've sold thousands of these products for $249. This webinar only, you can get this resource for just $99. You can either buy it in an MP3 format or you can buy the actual CDs, and I don't even offer this anymore except for this webinar. I will actually send you the 5 CDs right now for just $99. Let me tell you what you're going to get here, and then I'm going to answer questions. Again, this is the program that made me a top 20% producer. This is the program that companies pay me $10,000 to present to their sales teams. This is everything for you, from cold to close. And I don't care if you sell in person, if you're on the road, if you sell over the phone, you're going to learn the complete selling system. In CD1, I talk about the 80-20 rule in sales, and I break it down. I tell you exactly how I turn my career around, the 5 rules for top 20 performance, what you can begin doing today, how to pre-call preparation, the importance of scripts, and then I go into cold calling success. Hey, this CD will teach you how to handle those reflex objections. Just send me information, email me something, how to get past the gatekeeper. And then here's the most important thing of all, the real definition of a qualified lead. If you like the questions we went over today, if you think they'll make you a better salesperson, imagine having an entire CD filled with all the rest. You're going to learn, again, this is the complete system. You're going to learn how to close sales like the top 20%, how to overcome initial resistance. How we looked at it, it's just not for us. How to use trial closes, how to stop answering objections and instead isolate them, and how to stop talking past the close, and so much more. And then I'm going to give you word-for-word responses, how to handle the top 10 objections you get. Oh, the price is too high. I need to talk to my boss. I want to think about it. We already have somebody who handles that. And then in your 5th CD, this is the mental aspect. You can play this every single day before you go to work. I'm going to tell you how I moved into the top 1% after I got into the top 20%, how to build a team of support people, how to be in the closing arena at all times, how to learn to expect success, how to develop a winning attitude. That's worth $1,000 right there. The power of self-talk and so much more. Again, this is a $99 offer. I'm going to sell my next 25 CDs at that price. You can get it by mrinsidesales.com/webinaroffer.htm. The link is on the right-hand side for you. And again, I just want to tell you right now, this is the resource that can change your sales career. And if you don't believe me, click on that link and read what other salespeople just like you said after they purchased and began listening to and using the techniques that you'll see in this program. This will change your sales career, and I encourage you to invest in yourself.